create single serving desserts for my website on Cooking for One, but I kind of don't really like them that much. And I'm gonna share why today, or I'm gonna share a little bit about why I feel that way today. Before I get into that, I wanted to do a quick introduction. I'm Rebecca. I am a non-diet dietitian and a Cooking for One teacher, I guess. I love Cooking for One, and I kind of, like I said, kind of hate single serving desserts. And I wanted to share a couple quick reasons why they're not my favorite. The first reason I don't particularly love single serving desserts is, actually, let me take a step back for a moment. When I'm talking about single serving desserts, I'm really referring here to the desserts that are baked or take an amount of effort that is not just like assembling something and then you're good to go. I love cooking, I love baking, but if I've got a sweet tooth and I want something, most of the time I don't want to spend a half an hour or an hour to make it and then cook and then have it and then clean it up and then move on. I want to put the effort in and get a good amount out of it and then move on. So with that being said, I feel like the effort that is required to make one serving of a cookie or brownie or crisp, thinking of us being and getting into the fall, tart, like, I don't know, whatever else, that's a lot of effort and time and a lot of effort and time going into having something to enjoy once, which is great. Separating, cooking or baking and eating, sometimes the process of baking is really enjoyable and that is something different, but oftentimes, again, if I'm craving something and have to make it, I'm not making it because it's fun to make. I'm making it because I want to have dessert. And so I just don't feel like it really pays off with the effort that's going into it. But I will say the effort that goes into making a dozen cookies, or I don't know, maybe even 6 cookies, that feels a little bit more equal for me and that feels more worth it. And I can also enjoy those without having to put the time in every single time. And it takes just about the same amount of time to make a dozen cookies as it does one, with the exception of actually rolling them out and rolling them into balls and then placing them on the baking sheet. That is a little bit different, but it's not like 2 minutes. So yeah, the effort that goes into it. Another thing too is the energy of turning on the oven and using the oven. It's a lot that goes into cooking one thing and not cooking it for very long, or cooking it for half an hour for one thing. I will say the air fryers are great, but to be honest, I don't think that they do cookies and brownies right. The texture for myself is not as good. They look pretty terrible in my experience, but to each their own. Kind of my main reasons is actually kind of straightforward and simple, but I wanted to share that because as somebody who cooks for One and shares a lot of recipes for One, including a lot of desserts for One, I will continue to do it because I want to create things that will get out to you, and that's what's being searched. But I kind of don't believe in it that much, and I wanted to share why. Okay, so now that I've shared kind of those practical things, especially when it comes to effort and energy into what you get out of it. Oh, I also wanted to, I totally forgot something that I think is helpful to keep in mind. Cookies, brownies, some of these baked desserts, they can store really well. And so you don't have to necessarily feel obligated to finish them within a couple of days. It might sound great, but I think for a lot of us, like, that would really not feel good physically. But a lot of these cookies and brownies in particular will freeze really well. And that's if you have the space in the freezer, and maybe you don't. I guess that would be different. Rebecca from the future here. Here's a little introduction. So in addition to kind of the practical aspects and in the kitchen cooking aspects of why I don't really like single serving desserts, I also don't like them particularly because focusing on avoiding doesn't help our brains and our minds with anxiety and relationship with food and our bodies, and here are a couple reasons why. My first one is avoiding certain foods, whether it's not having XYZ food in your pantry or in your house, whether it's allowing yourself a small amount every whatever times. As much as that makes logical sense, and honestly it kind of makes logical sense, that's not really the way that our brains and our bodies work, especially when it's foods we really enjoy, whether it's enjoying the way that it tastes or kind of that experience of eating, whether it's enjoying the rebellion that we might experience, sticking it to it, or maybe even punishing ourselves. Whew, that's a tough one to live with. It's really hard. And oftentimes when we avoid having certain foods in the house or avoid eating certain things, when we're faced with it for whatever reason, it often leads to feeling out of control, binging, and then that also adds feelings of stress, anxiety, shame, and guilt probably, and feeling like a failure, and all of these negative, overwhelming, scary, uncomfortable, all of these feelings and experiences, which are really hard. And then once we get into kind of that space, it makes it easier to be harder on ourselves, and at the same time also kind of taking like an F it mentality. It doesn't matter anymore, and then doing things that maybe you don't, eating in a way that maybe doesn't feel good emotionally and physically, and kind of maybe punishing a little bit more, and a lot of different things. And it's complicated and so hard and so tough to experience, but I do want to say that this is a predictable course here, and also it's not that you're doing anything wrong by eating that food or that you're a failure. It's just that that's kind of the way that our bodies go. Focus on avoiding foods and whatever backfires for so many people and is really frustrating, or it leads to eating in a way that's very unhealthy and really tough. And then the final concept here that I wanted to bring up quickly is the forbidden fruit phenomenon. So there was this small study that was done with kids, and they were given a bowl of M&Ms and told not to eat the red M&Ms. And because of that very specific don't do this, they were kind of drawn to and paid more attention to the red M&Ms and ended up eating more of those red M&Ms, even though there were other options there. It was just the red M&Ms, but those, they were drawn to that. And I think this is also, again, all of these concepts kind of coming together. The more that we try to avoid, the more we think about that food, especially when that food is something that we've enjoyed in the past. We've got strong positive memories with them, experiences, tastes good. It's like a very enjoyable experience to have them. And then you remember that, and it's just a frustrating, hard place to be. I guess by sharing these kind of show that it is understandable and kind of normal to be having these experiences, and it's not just you. And it also totally sucks because trying to avoid and do all of this to stay away from certain foods, and again, going back into making just one serving of something so then you don't have other servings around to tempt you maybe. It doesn't really work. And instead, I think there's a better way to this. Now, I will say this is something, especially for people where the stress, the anxiety, the judgment, all of those things, if those are really high for you, seeking out support can be so helpful and so important. And there are lower cost resources as well as other resources that could be covered if you have health insurance. For example, seeing a non-diet dietitian can be a great option. I do take a number of insurances, and there's a lot of dietitians that do as well. So you can look into who's around in your area. What I like to look at it is we see kind of these extremes here. A lot of control or avoiding certain foods here, and then unconditional permission to eat. That is absolutely terrifying. That's understandable. How about taking a step or teeny tiny little steps along the way to see what that is? Because it's having a little bit more food freedom, having a little bit less anxiety about food can be so helpful and freeing and exciting and lead to being able to enjoy a wider variety of foods and having more enjoyment in life. If you're somebody who enjoys being social, if you're somebody who enjoys eating good food, or having those experiences for yourself and or with others, it's going to take a little bit of exploration, or a lot of exploration, to kind of go through that, and that's okay. So experiment with eating, or actually, no, let me step back for a second. Again, we're talking about small steps here. Explore your thoughts and beliefs about food, and also of your own self. Like, what is willpower? Is it something that you have or you don't have? When do you notice that your willpower is high or low? And I will say too, to just be clear, I kind of hate that term, and I don't think it's very helpful, because a lot of us have a lot of will to do a lot of things, and also eating is very complicated, as I mentioned before. So I don't think it's a helpful frame for eating. But I will say that we have these expectations based off of families, based off of past experiences, based off of our own bodies and what's expected for our bodies to be, or for what we eat being in our bodies. And so there's a lot going on, and it's really complicated. So taking that first step to just explore and recognize when judgment's coming up. Maybe we'll just kind of leave it at that. And it's okay to feel anxious around food. Seek out help wherever you can find it within the frame that you have access to. And if you can, and if you have health insurance, look into what's covered and see if you can kind of explore that with somebody. So that aside, that took a little bit of a turn, didn't it? But I am not a fan of single serving desserts, especially those you have to bake. And I do find it really helpful to have some snacks and treats on hand to make treats more normal. Let's normalize treats and kind of reduce some of that anxiety around them. But thanks for watching. If you made it this far, hopefully I'm able to cut that down a good amount so you're not bored. But yeah, eating is complicated. Remember that, it's complicated. Let me know what you think of this. Was it helpful? Was it not? Did you not connect with it? Did any of these feel relatable, or have you had these experiences yourself? I'm curious what you think. And just think about it. If you like this, and especially if you like Cooking for One information, make sure to like and subscribe so you can see these videos when it comes out. And yeah, thanks again for watching.